what is the, we're in the 3-dimensional world right now, 3D. But from my understanding, 5D allows us to manifest faster. It's like kind of skipping time. It's not saying you have to push things forward in the physical material world. You're jumping time in a sense. I don't know if that makes sense. And when we use our brain to think about something, we're sending a signal into space, into time, space, our environment, consciousness. We're putting a signal out into the world. And maybe sometimes when we think about someone, we're sending that signal to the other person, right? Potentially. And if we send a signal out consistently, we're signaling to the world. And if we fill our hearts with love and gratitude and harmony and peace in a beautiful state, a flourishing state of abundance, we're signaling something out and we're drawing it back in through the heart. Is that a bunch of baloney, or is that something that you can back by science to support our energy, our thoughts, our way of being, and connect it to the actions we take on a daily basis?
That's a really beautiful way that you've put it, and a great question as well. And so I just want to start that story with a few things like, if you think about what you and I watched as sci-fi when we were kids, so much of that is true now.
It's happening.
Yeah. And things that we used to think about the brain, like one way that we used to treat mental illnesses was by doing a frontal lobotomy or cutting the corpus callosum that, like bridges the left and right hemispheres. And we thought we were doing a good thing. I have actually given patients electroconvulsive therapy in my career, so not that long ago. And not because I wanted to, but I had a patient that came to me and said, I've got a long history of depression. And when it gets to the point that I don't want to eat and drink, the only thing that helps me quick enough that I don't have to suffer for weeks is ECT. And I said, are you sure you don't want to try? There are some modern antidepressants now that, have an effect in a couple of weeks. And she was like, no, I'm not eating, I'm not drinking, I'm totally depressed. I just want ECT. So I was like, okay. But we don't generally do that so much anymore. So our understanding of psychiatry, psychology, and then with the advent of brain scanning, how healthy brains function, has come a long way. Even at this conference at the weekend, all the speakers were amazing, but a few of them mentioned right brain, left brain. And I said, I'm sorry, but I've got to stand up here and say we really can't talk about the brain like that anymore. It's so much more complex and sophisticated with these amazing networks and subsystems, and it's just doing a big disservice to the brain to talk about.
It's all connecting.
Yeah. So in that sense, the research that most backs up what you're speaking to is, we can't prove all of that yet, but how we're getting there is through two main ways. One is looking at what happens in the brain with psychedelics and how they can induce neuroplasticity. So I keep my eye on the research at Johns Hopkins because it's like, to me, the best lab that's looking into that stuff. And so there are really great benefits from 1 or 2 doses spaced 1 to 6 months apart of certain psychedelics in mental illnesses like depression and schizophrenia, potentially in grief as well. But what's really interesting to me is that everything that you see that a psychedelic can achieve relatively quickly, you can achieve yourself by sleeping right, eating right, breathing right, and meditating.
Let's go. I'm so happy you're saying this because, I have a lot of friends that swear by psychedelics. They say like, oh, this changed my life and it's opened me up and it's allowed me to see things differently. But I've been to many meditation intensive retreats that I feel like I'm seeing visions and I'm seeing like geometric shapes and pulsating and, all these different things that we are creating ourselves within ourselves. It's the chemicals, the pharmacy that we have in our brain and body that can manifest and create these things are so powerful that I think if trained continually, it's hard work, but if trained properly and continually with the right teaching, can have just as powerful effects, if not more powerful, healing benefits than an outside pharmacy. That's just my belief. I may be wrong, but it sounds like from your research, that's true.
I'm so glad you said that, because I know it's particularly popular in LA as well.
Oh yeah. Everyone's talking about microdosing and
I know.
Ayahuasca and everything.
And my concern is that...
And they're swearing by it. It's helping them, immensely. And I'm like, cool, if it's helping you, cool. But can you try other things too that aren't changing your brain chemistry from the outside in, but rather from the inside out?
I think there's a couple of other things around that. One is that if it's not at, in a hospital or a lab under like proper supervision with qualified people, then how do you know how pure the source of whatever you're taking is? In the 60s, there were so many bad like LSD trips that happened to people. So what happens if something goes wrong and there's no one trained there that can help you? Neuroplasticity, as I remember we discussed before, is not always good. It can be bad. You obsess over a breakup. You're just wiring into your brain.
You stay in it for years, this grief.
And so can these psychedelics do that as well.
They can keep you trapped in a depressive state.
They can even they can make things more negative, because how do you know where that mushroom or whatever it is that you're taking is going to induce neuroplasticity in your brain? How are you directing that if you've got no experience of that? So that is a bit of a concern. When they did the ayahuasca research at Johns Hopkins, they used the pure ayahuasca. When you do it in ceremony, it's mixed with something that makes you purge.
Makes you throw up and feel sick.
And have diarrhea potentially as well. Yeah. So the purging...
I don't want that.
I know. I know.
Who wants to go through that?
It completely puts me off. Some people don't mind it so much, but it's done because it symbolizes a massive release.
Yes.
And that's part of...
And a rebirth.
Yes, right? Exactly. But you're taking something that you don't need to take. You could just take the ayahuasca and have the actual mental process without purging.
Interesting.
So, I'd volunteer for Johns Hopkins, but not for the ceremony.
So what do you think is the best way to rewire our subconscious mind to benefit us to feel healthier, happier, and whole as human beings versus taking drugs or some type of psychedelics?
So I wanted to put that together with the research on both the Buddhist monks and the US Marines that, that Amishi Jha did, the mindfulness based.
Amishi, she's great.
Training with. So all of that research shows the impact of different types of meditation on the brain. And however, so before we get to the meditation even, this temple needs to be in the best, it needs to be clean, it needs to be polished. And so that means that you're sleeping sufficiently, you're eating a really good nutrient-dense diet with the good fats and enough protein.
Fiber, everything.
All of that. The dark-skinned foods, that I think I've mentioned before. That you are not sedentary. Not necessarily that you do lots of high-intensity exercise, but that you move, you breathe, you breathe deeply. That you're well-hydrated. Then we come on to the meditation part. And meditation is, I remember even the first time I spoke about it at a bank thinking, am I going to get away with this? But people found it really interesting. And then it really was about sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed and, doing a certain kind of form of meditation, whether it's guided or breath. So the nature piece is that because we've existed in the palette of nature since we were in the cave, we do find it, most people find it beautiful unless you've got like terrible allergies or something. When you walk past trees, particularly certain trees that you have a lot of in LA, I've noticed. So pines, firs, cedars, cypresses, palms, they release something called phytoncides that actually interact with your immune system and boost the release of natural killer cells that help you to fight off cancers.
Trees. Wow. So being in nature helps you fight off cancers.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the beauty of it as well. So that's a chemical thing that's going on. But
not just the actual chemicals that are being released from those trees, but you actually being in the environment and viewing it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's beholding beauty. Making beauty is also important. So things like singing, playing an instrument, dancing, drumming, chanting. Because if you think about it, in the cave, we danced and drummed and chanted, but we didn't have resources to do anything that wasn't essential to our survival. So I still haven't quite worked out why, but those things are obviously essential to our survival.
Interesting.
Yeah.